and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Called to follow Jesus. Reading through Matthew's account of Jesus' call to the persons who became his first disciples moved me to imagine some of the things they could have told Jesus when he said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." Our text today says that Simon and Andrew, his brother, were casting a net in the sea, for they were fishermen. Jesus saw them and said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." The first thing I imagine they could have said to Jesus in response to his call was, "We are busy. We are busy." Simon and Andrew were at work. They were plying their trade. They were trying to make some money. They were doing something important when Jesus called them. This was also true of the other two brothers, James and John, whom Jesus called that day. We are told that they were in the boat with their father Zebedee, mending their nets. And it is worth noting that later in the Gospel according to St. Matthew chapter 9, we read of the call of Matthew or Levi. And we are told that Jesus saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth and said to him, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and followed him. Matthew chapter 9, verse 9. Again, the man was doing something when Jesus called him, and like Simon, Andrew, James, and John, responded by following Jesus. Now, they could have told Jesus they were busy, but they didn't. They followed. They became his disciples. Today we are reminded that the call to follow Jesus comes even when we are busy. The call comes in the midst of all that's going on in our life. Indeed, it is when we are busy that we need to be reminded, lest we forget, that Jesus is calling us. That Jesus is saying, "Follow me," even in the midst of all the busyness that might be about us. Jesus didn't wait until Andrew, Peter, James, and John, and Matthew had nothing to do before calling them to follow him. Indeed, the best time to respond to the call to follow Jesus is when we are active and able. When we have the energy and vigor to work and act and think and speak for Jesus and to learn from him. Following Jesus, being his disciple, sharing in his mission, is not something only for retirees or something done just because one has nothing else or nothing better to do. Busy, working people are called to follow Jesus. Look at the passage for today, and you, I'm sure, will realize that Jesus called busy, working men to be among his first disciples. It is so common to hear people speak about how busy they are and how much they have to do. Busyness, my friends, can get in the way of following Jesus. The first disciples could have told Jesus they were busy, but they didn't do that. They dropped what they were doing in order to follow Jesus. Busyness can be the bane of following Jesus, the bane of discipleship. This is the case with so many individuals nowadays. Too busy for Jesus. They have too much going on and have no time to spend with Jesus. No time to listen to Jesus and learn from him. Unlike those men whom Jesus called as he was walking by the Sea of Galilee, who dropped what they were doing to make space in their lives for Jesus, what we find in this modern age and this highly secular time is that the trend is for many people to do the very opposite. The tendency is to crowd our lives with more and more activities, with more and more things to do, with more and more work, more distractions and preoccupations, so that it becomes increasingly difficult to hear and answer the call of Jesus, to follow him, to be his disciple. We have to be careful, my friends, even when we come to a place like this, when we come to church, that we don't allow busyness and other distractions to keep us from tuning in and hearing what God has to say to us through his word written, and the word that is spoken, and the word that is Jesus himself. Peter, Andrew, James, and John demonstrates that being a disciple of Jesus means making ourselves available to him. And that is what it means to follow Jesus. And I am not here suggesting today, my friends, that we must give up our business or we must resign from our work in order that we might be followers of Jesus. What this story of the call of the disciples suggests to me is that we should make space in our lives. In the midst of all the busyness that is around us, we must make time and space to be with Jesus, to listen to Jesus, to learn from him. So in the midst of a busy life, above the tumult of the world and the murmurs of self-will, Jesus calls us to follow him, to be his disciple. Every day he passes by the places where we work and sees what keeps us occupied and says, "Follow me. Come, share some time with me. Come, share your life with me, and let me teach you how to live." That is what Jesus says to us each day that we live. The second thing the first disciples could have said to Jesus in response to his invitation, "Follow me," was, "We are not ready." They could have told Jesus that he caught them at a bad time. They could have told him to come back at another time because this time was not suitable. They could have put Jesus off, telling him to come back tomorrow or next week, or perhaps put him on hold for a much longer time. Not today. Not now, they could have said to Jesus. And as I reflect on this passage today, my friends, I find that another hindrance to following Jesus, something else that gets in the way of fellowship, of following Jesus, is the tendency to delay. There's a lack of urgency. Jesus calls us to follow, but we put him on hold. We are not ready. Not today. Not now, Jesus. That wasn't the case with Simon, Andrew, James, and John. They responded with urgency and obedience. In fact, the word follow me, when translated or in the original language, is really a soldier's word. It is a word of command. When that word was given, it required an instant, immediate response, or else the soldier was regarded as disobedient. It is the soldier's word, follow me. And so these men followed instantly. They responded with urgency and with obedience. They were ready to follow right there and then. In fact, I would say they took the bait, so to speak, and responded to Jesus as he expected them to respond. The text expresses the urgency with which Simon, Andrew, and James and John responded. Immediately, we are told, they left their nets and followed. Immediately, they left the boat and their father, Zebedee, and followed him. They didn't hesitate. They didn't come up with reasons why this was not a suitable time. Oh, my friends, that more and more people would respond to the call to follow Jesus with urgency and enthusiasm. The same kind of urgency and enthusiasm they show in other matters and on other occasions. Oh, that people would respond to Jesus in the same way. The first disciples responded with willing obedience. They were ready to follow Jesus. That lack of urgency in responding to the call to follow Jesus and the tendency to delay cause individuals to say something like, I'm young and not ready to follow Jesus. I'll do that when I'm older. I'm not ready now. I'm too young for that. But my friends, let me issue a word of caution here. One can never be sure how much time he or she will have. The Bible tells us, do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what a day may bring. And that is why there's no time like the present time to commit your way to the Lord. Friends, it's good to learn how to give preference to things that are important, but don't always seem urgent, over things that seem urgent but turn out not to be so important. And there are times when we waste a lot of time going after the things that we think are urgent, but they turn out not to be important. Have you ever heard the phone ring and you would go quickly to answer it? Because a ringing telephone gives a sense of urgency. Well, nowadays we have caller ID, etc., so we can identify who's calling even before we answer. But if you had no caller ID, sometimes you run to answer that ringing telephone because it sounds so urgent. And then you answer, and it turns out not to be such an important call after all. I gained this insight from Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. How to distinguish between the things that might appear to be urgent but they're not important. And those things that are so vitally important, that don't seem urgent, so we tend to put them off. And one such thing is like coming to Jesus, like following Jesus. It may seem like we have all our life to do so, but it is one of the most important things that we can do. And the sooner, the better. Forming a close relationship with Jesus and being his disciple may not seem that urgent today, but it is vitally important and can easily be placed on the back burner of life while we pursue other goals. The readiness those first disciples showed in responding to Jesus' call to follow him is a good example for us. Be always ready to follow Jesus. Don't put it off. Don't put Jesus on hold. And I want to end today by saying, I imagine another thing that those first disciples could have said in response to Jesus' call was, we are fishy. Now, I thought about this and what fishy might connote or imply or suggest. Remember, Simon, Andrew, James, and John were fishermen. And they were doing something related to fishing when Jesus called them. It is possible then that they smelled of fish. Then there's that saying, I'm sure you've heard it and you might have used it. Something smells fishy. Which means that something is not on the up and up or above board, so to speak. Or something about a person seems suspicious. So they could have said to Jesus, we are fishy. The point, my friends, is that those first disciples could have told Jesus that they were not the kind of people he wanted as his followers. They could have said they were not fit or worthy to be his followers. They could have said they were not good enough, that they couldn't measure up to his standard as his followers. But the good news, my friends, is that when Jesus calls us to follow, he calls us just where we are, just as we are, just with what we have, and he can make us what he wants us to be if we only follow him. Follow me, he says in our text, and I will make you fish for people. In other words, Jesus can make something of us that we never even imagined. Yes, friends, with Jesus, we can be more than we are without him. Jesus calls those who might feel unworthy and equips them so that they in turn might help to bring others who feel they are unworthy into the net of God's kingdom. When we follow Jesus, he can take our talents, our gifts, our experiences, and all we have and use them in his mission to reach others. Jesus can use us, and Jesus wants us for his service, for his mission. And as he called those first disciples, so Jesus is calling individuals today. He's calling persons from every walk of life to follow him. Follow him as you are. Follow him with whatever you have. Make yourself available, and he will teach you. He will train you. He will equip you as seems best for his purpose. Be his disciple and help to disciple others. Help to disciple your spouses, your children, other family members, your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues and co-workers. Get to know Jesus by following him so that you might in turn make Jesus known to others. Jesus wants us not to be mere believers in him. He wants us to be his followers, his disciples. That is, persons who are involved in a deep, intimate, learning, growing relationship with him. And that is the call that goes out today. And my question to you, my friends, is will you answer the call to follow Jesus today? Don't let busyness, unreadiness, and a sense of unworthiness keep you from following him, who is never too busy for you, who is always ready to help you, and who values you enough to give his life for you. Follow him today and all the days of your life. In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.